The morning of April 3rd, 1992, began like any other in the Yoda household, with the low hum of pre-dawn silence and the faint creaking of wooden floors as Abraham Yoda descended the narrow stairs from the attic where he had spent the night. Praying, his joints aching from kneeling too long on the hand-woven rug Miriam had gifted him on their 10th anniversary. The colors faded now, but still holding threads of memory and warmth from days long past. The rooster hadn't crowed yet, but the animals were stirring, and the sweet scent of hay and damp wood drifted through the slightly cracked window panes, while the distant whisper of wind through the trees bordering the east pasture carried with it an edge colder than usual, as if the forest itself had something to say, though Abraham, stoic and God-fearing, ignored such thoughts the way a man ignores a shadow he knows isn't his. Walking past the kitchen where the hearth still held the ghost of last night's fire, and stepping out onto the porch with his kerosene lantern to watch the morning fog roll in like a silent tide across the fields, where the stalks of winter rye swayed faintly though there was no breeze, only the kind of stillness that made your breath feel too loud, your thoughts too heavy. And as he looked toward the tree line, that dense stretch of ancient trunks and creeping vines that had stood like a wall since before his grandfather's time, he felt again that old unease, the kind that had first settled into his bones as a boy when he'd gotten lost near the creek and heard something breathing beneath the brush, something large, patient, and entirely unseen. And though he had told himself for years it was only a deer or a bear or perhaps even a trick of the wind, the memory refused to leave, returning now with such clarity that he could almost feel the damp moss beneath his bare feet again, the sharp bite of cold air in his lungs, and the way the forest had gone utterly silent before he turned and saw, or thought he saw, something impossibly tall slip behind a tree just as he blinked. Gone the next moment, but leaving behind a presence so thick it had clung to his skin for days. And now, standing here as a grown man with a wife and 5 children, still sleeping upstairs, he told himself for the 100th time that it was nothing, that he was a man of faith, not fear. And yet his fingers tightened on the lantern's handle as he scanned the edge of the woods, noting a break in the underbrush he didn't remember being there the day before. A subtle shift, a branch bent too low, footprints maybe, or was that just where the deer walked last night? But he turned away all the same, unwilling to give life to old stories or childhood nonsense, and returned inside where the warmth of the hearth and the sound of Miriam descending the stairs grounded him again in the reality he had built, a world of discipline, order, and hard-earned peace that he was determined to preserve, no matter how often the forest reminded him that they were not alone on this land, no matter how many times he dreamed of whispers and wooden faces peeking between trees, no matter that just last week young Esther had woken screaming of a tall man without eyes standing outside her window, chalk-white hands pressed to the glass. And though Abraham had comforted her and prayed with her and told her it was only a dream, the truth was he had seen the smudge the next morning, a faint outline of fingers that Miriam said must have been from a bird, but Abraham knew better. He always hadn't now. As the morning light grew stronger and the day began to stir with the usual chores, the gathering of eggs, the milking of cows, the folding of linens dried by firelight, the Yodas moved about unaware that this would be the last normal day they would ever know, that something had shifted in the woods, something that had waited long and watched long and was now ready to cross the line between shadow and form, between myth and memory, something that had not forgotten Abraham, nor the promise made long ago when he had unknowingly trespassed into its domain as a child, something that had been patient, terribly patient, for over 30 years, And so the day moved on with deceptive normalcy, as Miriam stirred the oatmeal with slow, practiced circles, humming an old hymn under her breath, her mind half on breakfast and half on the upcoming Sunday gathering, wondering if she had enough elderberry preserves left to trade with Sister Rebecca. While Eli chopped firewood with mechanical rhythm, his teenage strength still clumsy but improving, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the early hour, his mind wandering toward the river bend where he'd spotted tracks he couldn't quite identify the day before. Large and oddly spaced, not quite like a deer or raccoon, or even the occasional stray dog that wandered from the town. Ruth sat in the sewing room with her sampler, pretending to stitch but instead watching the woods through the glass. The shape of the trees captured her attention in a way she couldn't explain. There was something wrong with the pattern this morning. The silhouettes didn't match the ones from yesterday, and she, being sharper and sharper-minded than most, gave her credit for, especially in a community where curiosity was often considered the doorway to sin, felt a tug deep in her chest that told her something was off, though she dared not say it aloud. Jonas, ever the quiet one, was already in the barn with the hens, speaking to them in whispers, as he always did, telling them stories from the books he wasn't supposed to read but had secretly hidden beneath the floorboards of the boys' shared room upstairs. Books borrowed from an old traveling salesman who had broken a wheel outside their home years ago and had bartered novels for food, leaving behind more than he knew. Esther and Naomi played in the back garden, making chains of dandelions and singing off-key rhymes that made the chickens cluck nervously, the kind of songs children sang without knowing where they came from, passed down through generations like forgotten warnings wrapped in melody. Songs that spoke of tall men in black coats and doors that opened to nowhere, and though Miriam scolded them gently for the strange lyrics, she didn't think too much of it. Children had wild imaginations. After Albert had she known where Esther had heard those words, how she had woken in the night and written them in chalk on the attic wall, without ever remembering it come morning. Perhaps she would have looked at the forest differently that day. Perhaps she would have taken the family and left the farm behind, tradition or not, because sometimes the old stories aren't just stories, and sometimes the forest watches back. But by the time Abraham stepped outside again after breakfast to fetch a broken plough blade from the shed, the air had changed, subtle, like a note in a hymn that's half a pitch too low. Not enough for most to notice, but enough to make the horses uneasy and the wind pass in short, sharp gusts that carried with them the faint smell of something burnt and old, like cedar wood left to rot underground for too long. And when he paused mid-step, his hand on the rusted latch of the shed, he saw, just at the far edge of the eastern field, a figure not moving, not approaching, just there, barely visible through the mist, tall and still as a tree, draped in what could have been black cloth or maybe shadow itself. And before Abraham could process what he was seeing, it was gone, vanished as if it had never been, leaving only a shiver down his spine and a low moan from the barn that sent a flock of crows erupting from the rooftop, like an explosion of ink against the grey sky. He said nothing of it to Miriam, nor to Eli when he returned from the woods with a bundle of sticks and a strange look on his face, for the boy had found something 2 deep gouges in the bark of a sycamore near the creek, long and wide as if made by claws, though there were no animals in the region that could leave such marks, and no reason for Eli to mention them other than a gut feeling he didn't yet understand. And so he kept it to himself, tucking the image into the back of his mind where it joined other half-formed thoughts and doubts. seeds of dread planted in soil still too innocent to fully grasp what was growing there. By midday, the clouds had thickened and the wind howled once, sharp and clear, like a scream heard from far across a valley. But no one in the family commented on it. Perhaps they all heard it and ignored it, or perhaps only one or two truly noticed, but the silence that followed was heavier than usual, pressing down on the house and its occupants like the hand of something ancient and unseen. And when the afternoon chores were finished and supper was prepared, the family gathered for prayer as they always did, sitting in a circle on the wooden floor with heads bowed and hands clasped. And it was in that moment, beneath the soft glow of the oil lamp and the rhythmic cadence of Abraham's voice, that Esther opened her eyes and stared past the family into the hallway, her face going pale as the color drained from her cheeks and her lips parted as if to scream, but no sound came. And when Miriam noticed her expression and followed her gaze, there was nothing there, only shadows and the low creak of the old house settling into its evening bones. But Esther refused to sleep that night, clinging to her sister and whispering of the tall man again, the one who had no eyes, who had told her in her dreams that the roots beneath the house had woken, that the ground remembered, and that soon, very soon, it would all come back.